Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk about the other triangle, US, India, and Russia. Since Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow, which, if you have been following Khanversations, I call as a snub to Washington, D.C. and the West, there has been some backlash from America. The American ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, gave a speech in which he essentially issued a warning to India, saying that strategic autonomy is all in good, but when there is a conflict going on, there is no such thing as strategic autonomy, essentially saying that if India were to enter a war with China, they would need America's help. Not only that, but the State Department also made comments that they were not very happy with Prime Minister Modi hugging Vladimir Putin, even as the NATO summit, the 75th NATO summit was taking place in Washington, D.C. And then subsequently, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of the United States, made very interesting observations on MSNBC, in which he basically said that India is mistaken if it thinks that Russia is a good and long-term friend. So we will talk about all these issues, and I want to really ask this question: is Russia really that good a friend, and is the United States really that bad a friend that Indians are so suspicious of the United States? So I want to deconstruct and examine that narrative. But before that, subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. So first of all, let's listen to what Jake Sullivan has to say. And I think he has a point.
Embracing Vladimir Putin, literally embracing him at the same time. What is your reaction to that and to India's continued economic support of Russia?
Well, look, we've made clear to every country in the world, including to India, that a bet on Russia as a long-term reliable partner is not a good bet. And that's especially true in our view for India, because Russia is becoming closer to China, in fact, is becoming the junior partner to China. And in that way, they would side with China over India any day of the week. And Prime Minister Modi, of course, has profound concerns about the potential for Chinese aggression against India, which we have seen over recent years. So we'll keep making that case. But countries like India do have a historic relationship with Russia. So none of this is going to change dramatically overnight. This is playing the long game. It is making investments in democratic partners and allies around the world, including countries like India, and we think that that bet will pay off as we go forward.
The point that Jake Sullivan is making is this, that given the current geopolitical circumstances, even though India has had long and good friendship with the Soviet Union and Russia, and Soviet Union have supplied a lot of arms to India. At one point, India was over 70% dependent on Russia for its weapons and arms, and continues to remain dependent, even though it has in the past few years made huge diversification. And now India gets its weapons from not just Russia, but Israel, France, and the United States also. So basically, India has been moving away from Russia, not consolidating that friendship, but diluting the dependence on that friendship. But the main point that Sullivan is making is that because of the war in Ukraine, Russia is rapidly becoming dependent on China. It's become a junior partner in that relationship. It depends more on China. The trade is over $250 billion, 5 times more than the trade, even though India has really stepped up its buying of Russian oil. And in the last 3 years, India's bilateral trade from Russia went up from $8 billion to over $65 billion. China still right now has 5 times more trade relations with Russia than India. But not only that, even though India keeps saying Russia is a very good friend, it is China which is actually helping Russia in its war in Ukraine by providing dual technology and lots of other things such as semiconductors, etc., which go into manufacturing of weapons. India is not helping Russia at all. The only help that India is providing is 2 things: not condemning Russia outright, and number 2 is buying Russian oil and risking sanctions from the United States, secondary sanctions that the US has threatened to impose on anybody who trades with Russia. But when people say that Russia is more reliable and durable friend than the United States, they essentially go back to 1971 when the United States essentially sent its aircraft carrier into the Bay of Bengal during the War of 1971, ostensibly to help and support Pakistan. And if the Soviet Union had not intervened, then perhaps the outcome of the war would have been different. So from that moment onwards, that has become the main point when people say the United States is unreliable. I'm not even going to touch that point. I'm going to leave it as it is. But let's actually examine to what extent the Soviet Union and Russia have been friends with India. So let's go to 1962. Let's go to 1962 and see. Oh, before that, let me tell you something. That today, I co-authored an article with a Brazilian international law scholar. His name is Lucas Lima, and we published an article on the BRICS in the influential magazine The Diplomat. I will post a link to that in the community section and also in the description of this video. So please take a look at it. It talks about some of the issues that we are raising here with regards to global order and balance of power and the impact of BRICS, etc. But anyway, coming back, let's go back to 1962. Where was the Soviet Union? Did the Soviet Union stand with India when India was humiliated by China, lost a lot of territory to China in 1962? No. The Soviet Union did not help India because, the excuses that people make that, oh, India was a non-aligned country, and so the Soviet Union could not have come to its help. That's one point. And number two is that, oh, the Soviet Union was busy with the Cuban Missile Crisis and the possibility of a nuclear war with the United States, who kept the Soviet Union preoccupied. But let me tell you, so was the US. In 1962, it was preoccupied. And in 1962, India was non-aligned just not for the Soviet Union, but also for the United States. Yet, the US came to India's help in 1962. Nehru wrote desperate letters, and those letters are out there. And you can see some of the examples of the things that Nehru had written in his letters asking America for help. Here is one example. I've taken these paragraphs. He said, till now we have requested our request for assistance to essential equipment, and we are most grateful for the assistance which has been so readily given to us. This is Pandit Nehru's letter around 19th of November 1962. So look at that point, is very important. This is his probably third letter to Kennedy asking for help. And he says that we have restricted our request for assistance to essential equipment, and we are most grateful for the assistance which has been so readily given to us. So in this letter itself, they acknowledge the help that the United States have given with small arms and other things. The US and India were already operating all kinds of flights. The US was enjoying basing rights in India, flying aircraft into Tibet to help the Tibetan insurgency against China. So the US was already helping and working with the Indian Army in 1962. Nobody recognizes it, while the Soviet Union was not helping India. So in 1962, the Soviet Union did not really help India, but the US did. In fact, the US was planning to send its aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk in this direction. Prime Minister Pandit Nehru also requested, you can see here, he says that I'm advised that for providing adequate air defense, a minimum of 12 squadrons of supersonic all-weather fighters. He requested 12 squadrons of supersonic fighters. He also requested bombers. He also requested that American personnel fly these planes because Indian pilots were not yet fully trained, etc. So he was making desperate efforts, and the United States was ready to help, and the US and the British then let the Chinese know that they were going to help India, and China abruptly stopped the war, declaring it had achieved its goals, which it had. It had taken a lot of India's territory. So in 1962, it was the US that helped India and not the Soviet Union. And like I said, you can maintain whatever you want to think happened in 1971. I'm not going to contest that. But subsequently, what has happened in 2020 and what has happened in 2022? The United States came to India's help in 2020 after the Galwan episode and even during the Galwan episode. Right now, the United States is providing India with cold weather clothing for troops deployed on the China border. The US provided real-time intelligence in 2022 when the Chinese tried to get into the Arunachal Pradesh area. The US warned the Indians and Indians were ready. So already you can see in 2020 and 2022, it was the US which helped India militarily against China, and it was not Russia. Not only that, the United States has repeatedly condemned China for its military and aggressive activities on India's border. Has Russia done that? Has Russia supported India after the Galwan episode? Has Russia supported India after the Arunachal Pradesh invasion in 2022? No. The US has done that. And so I don't know why this rhetoric continues that Russia is our friend, a reliable friend, when there are so many instances when the US has proven. Not only that, I want you to look at this. When China recently renamed Arunachal Pradesh and gave it some Chinese name, did Russia condemn China? Absolutely not. But the United States Senate issued a resolution saying they recognize Arunachal Pradesh as an integral part of India. They recognize India's sovereignty over Arunachal Pradesh. Not only that, the resolution also condemns China's use of military force along the disputed Indo-China border. So you can see that Resolution 75 of the 118th Congress, this was passed basically last July. In fact, July 25th, 2023, just about a year ago. Did the Russians do that? Certainly not. And none of this is acknowledged. I listened to a few Indian television and YouTube channels which have large following of nationalistic Indians, and none of them point out these things. It's very strange. In India, there is no discussion properly. It's just rhetoric, and a lot of jingoism all the time. None of them are discussing these issues. Not only that, but I also want to tell you that the biggest provider of foreign aid to India has been the United States. So there is a study that was done, and from 1947 to 2012, the US provided India with $65 billion worth of aid in education, in agriculture, etc., non-military aid to help India with its democratic process, etc. That is obviously adjusted for inflation. Not only that, the US continued to provide aid to India. In fact, even as recently as during the COVID period, the US provided $250 million of COVID aid to India in 2020 and 2021. Russia didn't. Nobody acknowledges this. I find this quite fascinating. Look, I'm not saying that the United States and India should immediately become a major military ally. That is India's choice. But at least the narrative should be honest, and Indian public should know what they are getting into. Forget about all of these things. There are 5.5 million Indians in the United States. Nobody in India gets up and says, when I grow up, I want to go and become a Russian and live in Russia and study Russian. No. Everybody in India wants to come here. Last year, there were 100,000 people stopped at the border who were coming illegally, mostly from Gujarat, by the way, and Punjab. So there are millions of Indian students coming here, settling down here. So this whole talk of Russia as a great friend is rubbish. It is rubbish. And I'll tell you why India is worried about Russia, and I'll also tell you why Modi went there. It is only because India is so worried that Russia and China will become friends, and then China will have Russia as well as Pakistan attacking or at least working against India's interests regionally. These days, Russia is taking a lot of interest in South Asia, including in Bangladesh, including in Pakistan. Russia invited Pakistan to become part of the North-South transportation corridor, which was essentially India, Iran, and Russia to begin with. Now, Russia is inviting Pakistan to join it. So India is worried that Russia might start taking steps which might hurt India's interests and advance Chinese interests. Even though China and Russia are not on the same page, Russia is dependent on China, which is not as dependent on India. So I want to essentially point out that even long term, India, the US is going to be a more useful ally, than Russia. So yes, like I said, India doesn't become a straight up ally and partner with the United States, but to consistently keep saying we are suspicious of India, of the US, and India has received more from the Soviet Union and less from the US is not really true. I think people should go back and read their history and also look at the immediate history in the last 3-4 years. Who has been more helpful? Just ask yourself one question. When was the last time Russia condemned China for all its aggression against India? Simple question. If Russia is such a great friend of India, why is it not helping India in its hour of need? And if India is such a great help of Russia, why is India not helping Russia? In its war with Ukraine, all it's doing is buying oil. Yes, that is helpful for Russian economy. But beyond that, no military assistance at all. Because India wants to steadily move towards the West and become part of the Western global ecosystem. So that's the point I wanted to make. I think Jake Sullivan has a very valid point when he says that Russia is becoming a junior partner of China. And in the long run, it's not going to serve India's interest to maintain the so-called strategic autonomy. India doesn't have strategic autonomy if it has to go to Moscow to balance pressure from the West. Remember that. It means that you're just relying on another global power to balance one global power. You're not able to remain independent and autonomous. So this is the point. I'm sure that I hope that this will make you think. This is things that you probably don't hear often. So I have heavily shared articles, etc. So do watch this show rather than listening to this show. So we will continue with this conversation. There is going to be probably in less than 2 weeks a Quad foreign ministers meeting. India is supposed to host it. India is the president of the Indo-Pacific Quadrilateral Dialogue this year, and India hasn't done anything yet, hasn't hosted either foreign ministers or heads of state meeting this year. So there is quite a possibility that there might be one in Japan, even though India will be the chairperson of that session. So we'll continue with this dialogue as we go forward. People here in the United States, obviously, because of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and the elections and the fiascos that Joe Biden is committing during the debates, etc., the country has become a bit more preoccupied with its domestic politics. So it is quite possible that we may not have that meeting of the Quad foreign ministers. But still, we shall see, hopefully. So please, let's continue with this dialogue. Do subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and continue to share this with your friends and your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. And don't forget to read the article that me and my friend wrote in The Diplomat on the expansion of BRICS and their impact on the global order. Take care. Bye.